Welcome to Business Owner Bootcamp, the Wealthspire Advisors podcast designed to help business owners and entrepreneurs take control of their finances. Hosts and financial advisors Michael Delgas and Sandy Wiggins break down key topics like tax strategies, exit planning, business valuations, and real-world experiences with expert guests. And now, here are your hosts, Michael Delgas and Sandy Wiggins.
Hi, I'm Sandy Wiggins, and I want to welcome you to Business Owner Bootcamp. I am a co-host along with Mike Delgas, and the purpose of Business Owner Bootcamp is to help business owners navigate the complexities of growing and managing their business and their wealth. And I work closely with a number of clients across the country, primarily closely held business owners and their families. I'm happy to welcome Matt Reynolds, one of my Wealthspire teammates today, and really excited about the conversation we're going to have for the next few minutes. Matt, if you wouldn't mind, maybe share a little bit about yourself and lead us into the topic we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, Sandy. Chief Revenue Officer under Newport Private Wealth, which is one of the Wealthspire group of companies up here in Canada. Been with the company for 24 years. We manage about $7 billion on behalf of a relatively small number of families. And most of those families are business owners just like yours.
Well, great. Well, let's jump into a survey that you and your team put together. You and I have had the pleasure of chatting a good bit about it. It's an important topic, not only to our audience, but it's something I think you and I share an interest in. You know, we talk about the technical side of things. This takes us in a different direction. So if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about the survey.
Sure, happy to. I mean, this really resulted from questions that you and I get all the time from business owners. There's a question that we get all the time, which is, and it goes something like this. I'm thinking of selling my business, or I just sold my business and I'm not quite sure what to do next. Can you help me? And as you know, as well as I do, that's not one question. There's a whole series of questions within there. And some of those questions are technical and some of them are more subjective and personal. And of course, you and I relate to the personal financial planning side of things and how to make sure that clients are structured properly and taken care of, intergenerational wealth transfers. There's all sorts of issues, but it goes much deeper than that because you're going through a process of exchanging corporate equity to personal liquidity. So what we did, we quickly came to the conclusion that the best group to help those clients that were asking those questions were the clients we already have and other business owners who had already sold to essentially act as mentors. So we created a survey and it was designed around some very straightforward questions about the sale process before and after. But the unique element of the study was that it was created within a pay it forward framework. And when I say pay it forward, it means asking the sellers not only what they did, but also what they would recommend the next seller do. And that was the genesis of the survey. And it's some years old, but the content we created from that and the guidance we've been able to create for other clients has been an evergreen impact to our business.
Well, that's awesome, and you know, I appreciate your comment there that there's a long shelf life to this. You know, there's always changes in tax laws and economics of deals, but the emotional side of selling a business, you know, that's a constant. So let's just kind of ease into the conversation based on the survey. Tell us a little bit about who participated in the survey, you know, and maybe as an example, did they use investment bankers? Were they out soliciting an offer? You know, what initiated the consideration of a transaction?
Well, as you know as well as I do, it's not always a golden unicorn coming up and offering the business seller a bag of gold. One of the interesting elements of the survey and the initiation, first part of the survey really related to how did that sale come about, which is what you just referenced. And what's surprising is it's actually quite rare or relatively rare that an unsolicited offer arrives at the table, and it's also not necessarily a structured sale that resulted in the sale. In many cases within the survey, we found that there was a health problem, there was a capital structure issue. There's a litany of reasons that business sellers had to sell in some cases, and in a lot of cases they weren't prepared. And it's the
Mhm,
process
mhm.
of preparation where we do see a lot of that regret gap where people say, "Hey, I wasn't prepared for the sale process to start." That's something that has to start very early on, or has to always be considered as you're running the business, because it can happen at any time for any number of reasons.
Yeah, and let's separate those two things a little bit. The concept of having that in your thought process as you're running a business. Nobody wants to prepare for getting hit by the beer truck, right? But it's a reality, and we oftentimes think about um, the technical side of things. Having a tax attorney, having guidance on investment banking and valuations of your business, and optimizing the management structure and that sort of thing. But rarely do we think about what life is going to be after the sale of a business. There's so much tied to that, and you and your team put together some really cool information about um, do what I say, not what I did. So let's
Right.
dig into that a little bit and think about what are those takeaways that sellers were surprised to learn.
Yeah, and part of it is not necessarily what they were surprised to learn, Sandy. Is surprised how they reacted
Mm.
afterwards. And so I'll bucket those regret gaps into three areas. The first being technical, and the technical elements of sale and what they were prepared for. Well, the focus on selling a business cannot solely reside with your corporate advisors. And that's because post-transition, there is structuring and consideration that needs to be accounted for. You need to be thinking of that. And there's almost a disbelief, if you will, that the sale is actually going to happen. And then the proceeds arrive, and then it's, oh my goodness, now I have to make the rest of the decisions of my life. Whereas if the business owner just looked at that as a continuum to say, listen, there's corporate equity turning into liquidity. I need to think of that as one continuous process. If I don't, I'm likely to make a few mistakes through that process. And I'm also probably unprepared to deal with some of the relationship issues that are going to result. And so when we think about some of the regret gap, it is the emotional preparation of sale cannot be understated. And so we found a lot of regrets around that area as well, because as you and I were just speaking about off air before this call, you never know who's going to turn up at your doorstep. The sale is rarely a secret, and it's often odd to see the reaction of offspring, of other family members, and of neighbors up and down the street, and how all of a sudden they're interacting with you in a different way.
Yeah, and so you talked about the investment side of things. You mentioned that liquidity. You talked about the nature of relationships. Let's explore that a little bit, because oftentimes, because a transaction is not typically a secret, you're presented with a lot of opportunities on the investment side. And I know that's just one piece of it, but let's touch on that for a moment. What are the things that the survey, what are some of the points the survey uncovered that we might want to make sure our audience hears?
Sure. I guess I'll focus on two, and the first is your relationship with yourself. And what we found is that many of the business owners, almost half of them, were so emotionally tied to the business. Their identity was so wrapped up in the business that when all of a sudden there is this chasm of how to redefine yourself post sale, that is a real issue that a lot of entrepreneurs fail to recognize. And so that's an important consideration. Taking that into account is something that the survey really pointed to, and it's something we tell our business owners as well. Consider how you're going to define yourself post sale. So that was one of the key elements. And then of course the other element when you talk about investments, uh, the process of selling is exhausting. So almost two-thirds of respondents felt emotionally and physically exhausted post sale. And so the question becomes, how quickly should you make a decision in that state about this newfound liquidity? Business owners, uh, by contrast, there is this preconceived notion that business owners are big risk takers. And one of my partners, Steve Hafner, recently pointed out, Malcolm Gladwell has this study that says business owners aren't big risk takers. They don't want to roll the dice again. In fact, the survey said that only 1 in 10 of business sellers reinvested in a new business right away. It takes a while. So I guess the point of the survey would be it's okay to take a breather. It's okay to allow yourself to take a breather and digest and sit on that liquidity for a period of time. Not indefinitely, of course, but the method in which you are going to be taking risk is all of a sudden being handed over to a professional advisor. In most cases, there are many of the survey respondents decided to invest their own proceeds, but most started to search for an advisor that was able to protect their capital. And that relationship is different. It's no longer corporate equity, it's personal liquidity.
Yeah, and you mentioned the concept of reinventing oneself, and in that process, some folks enjoy managing assets. More often than not, the survey showed that that's not the case, that they do want to work with an advisor. But let's talk about those two relationships. One with yourself, and then number two with the investment advisor. On the
Sure.
first one, as it relates to that relationship with yourself and purpose and how you're going to spend your time, was there anything that the survey uncovered that we could share with the audience on, how do you go about reinventing yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'll break that into some good news first. And the first part is more than 80% of the survey participants said that selling the business was the right thing to do. And so, in spite of these emotional challenges and redefining oneself, selling the business was the best thing for them and their families. So that's the good news. In terms of redefining themselves, it is a process. It's a process that needs to be undertaken with some intentionality, if you will, and it can't be overlooked. And it's not quite as simple as going out to the golf course and just, hey, I'm going to get my handicap down. It really is, how do you invest yourself in the community? Uh, Most business owners are invested already in the community. In many cases, it's applying oneself more to charitable endeavors, board memberships to stay active, because that driven nature of a business owner, it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away, but it does need to be rechanneled, or you will be mowing your lawn to an unreasonable length.
Yeah, and so I think you're touching on something that I have observed as well. So many business owners are 100 miles an hour, day in and day out, weekends, weekdays, and that's why they're successful in their business. It's part of their DNA. And now, depending on the nature of the transaction, perhaps they have a continuum with the acquirer. Maybe they're not. Those things are unique to each deal. But what is common to each deal is there is a change. They're no longer making the final decisions. And in my experience, the sooner that business owners can begin to think about chapter 3 or 4 or chapter 2, the better. And that's challenging because they're thinking about preparing to do a deal. As you said, it's exhausting. They're focusing their energy there. How in the world can we also ask them to think about what they're going to do with their day, as soon as the deal is done? But those two things run parallel to each other are really critical.
Couldn't agree more. And every investment advisor will say, listen, we understand how business owners and business sellers think. Rarely does the broad composition of their client base consist of business sellers. That's the similarity that your business has with our business. And we understand the humanistic element of guiding clients through that process, recognizing that it's a journey. Most investment advisors will say, you got to get invested. Don't leave your money on the sidelines. You got to go, 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 go. And listen, you and I both know that the opportunity cost of leaving your money in cash for too long is extraordinarily high. You do have to get your money to work. But many clients out there right now are not working with advisors that understand that, understand all the components that are involved, including the proper structuring, including making sure that there's a process to educate your kids about how this wealth is going to impact them. If you think about it, most business owners have been through a cycle where they didn't get a paycheck, where the business was struggling. And these are great clients. And I joke about it to an extent because they're not big spenders. They've learned to be thrifty because that business has been their lifeblood, and that business hasn't always produced a huge amount of cash flow. So they've lived through that risk cycle. And the process of making sure the kids understand how to be accountable for that newfound wealth has to be a structured one. It's not as simple as bringing in the kids once a year and saying, hey, uh, you're rich. You know, be careful. It's a process of transmuting your values through an investment advisor and a process to make sure that that is handled in a very delicate and structured manner. And that doesn't happen in a day. It happens over years and years.
Yeah,
So
and
that
and
that
and
so that's just one element of it, Sandy. But there are many, many others.
and as you're speaking about that, the word stress comes into my mind, right? And there's a lot of stress that goes on with running a business, with preparing to sell a business, to selling it, and then on top of that, reinventing yourself and orchestrating the implications of this wealth on your family and your community. Um, I think my takeaway on what you're saying is being thoughtful, being patient with yourself, not feeling hurried to do any particular thing, and that really starts at the beginning of the transaction. Hopefully you're planning long enough and far enough ahead that you're not hurried. If something, like you said, a health issue presents itself early on, unexpectedly, hopefully you're already planned. So anything that you can do to reduce the stress of all of these elements just makes it a smoother ride and ultimately, hopefully, a better outcome.
But it's a good point. If you look at the regret gaps, and the biggest regret gaps revolved around the pre-sale planning. So almost 40% of respondents wished that they had started pre-planning the sale 2 to 3 years before. And of course, if you don't know when that horizon is, that means you should be probably getting engaged now. And to be clear, it's not a specific discussion on your corporate accounts and records and making sure you've got a notice to reader or audited financial statements. It's about pre-thinking how that equity is going to turn into liquidity and be structured appropriately. So overall, it's close to 80% of participants say, yes, you have to methodically pre-plan, but only a third did it. Only a third did it. And so that's what we call the regret gap, if you will. Another area involved in the sale process was just the mentorship. And a very large percentage of respondents say, I wish I would have had a mentor. And that's someone else who's been through the process of selling a business, not for contractual advice, but as a touchstone to say, hey, listen, this is happening. Did you feel this way? How should I respond to this? So providing some substance around that mentorship was important as well. So, and then the last area, Sandy, was really around what is this business worth? And the other area, the large regret gap, was very few participants had a professional valuation of their business done or ready to go as they entered the sale process. So that takes a lot of the emotion away during the sale process. If you have an objective and independent view of what the business is likely worth to a strategic buyer, to a private equity buyer, uh, these are different considerations and different motivations because those different types of buyers can take the business in a different direction. And that's a little bit aside from the personal advice, Sandy. It really is. If my legacy is this business and where it's going, I should be able to evaluate all different types of buyers when I'm thinking about what it's worth.
Yeah, there's a strong connection between what is it worth and what do I want for it and my employees and my customers and clients moving forward. And you want to have choice, you want to have flexibility there. And you and I have both seen sellers take perhaps a smaller payout because of the direction that they want for themselves and their employees and clients. And so that that element of time just creates opportunities for different approaches.
Right, right. And the same goes through with what do you want from your money, your personal liquidity post sale. And that was another area of analysis within the study, which is the style of investment advisor that you're likely to work with post sale, and some regrets and some opportunities in that realm to help educate business sellers as they consider. In many cases in the investment industry, the focus is on, over the last recent history, who has the best rate of return. And really that is not the objective that we found within the respondents. The objective was the protection of capital. And
Mhm.
so it really was not around maximizing the rate of return, but maximizing the consistency of that capital. You have enough capital to live on, your heirs probably have enough capital to live on if it's protected well. But the pursuit of a high risk investment strategy based on short-term historical results, that that has resulted in a lot of heartache as well. And so that's another important consideration. In many cases, when you're just getting established in the investment world with your personal portfolio, the goal is return maximization. But for business sellers, it's different. It's a different objective. And there are two metrics that need to be reviewed. One is, the rate of return, and everyone needs a competitive rate of return to stay ahead of the rate of inflation. But the other element is to reduce the volatility. And consistency really does pay its own dividends.
Well, and again, back to the nature of liquidity, you're speaking about an organized fashion of developing a strategy around cash flow needs, risk tolerance, tax planning. Earlier on, though, you touched on the aspects of relationships around you
Sure.
when that liquidity event occurs. And I don't think we'd be doing a good job if we didn't talk about all the crazy ideas that people show up with, offering get in now, it's a great opportunity. And it's easy to get caught up in that energy. You're looking for something to feed your entrepreneurial appetite, but getting too aggressive too quickly, not doing decent due diligence, we see that happen. So what's your perspective there? And if anything, what did you learn from the survey on that point?
Well, some of the information that's not published in the survey, where there was some color around what was invested in. And of course, people get involved with an investment advisors, but on the personal side of things, we saw everything from investments into punk rock bands, the production of punk rock albums, all the way to nephew Tim's startup technology business, to basic franchises. And in many cases, what is needed is almost a buffer between the entrepreneur and those people that are seeking to access that capital. And you're absolutely correct. The decision making is can be quite volatile as a result of the exhaustion of sale. And there's no defined timeline as when that exhaustion wears off. For some, it doesn't exist at all. For some, it takes a couple of years to shake out the cobwebs. So we'd advise against short-term volatile, and I shouldn't call them volatile, personal into private ventures, or to make sure that the client has that buffer working with a financial advisor that is used to dealing with those inquiries, and defining what is acceptable to invest in versus not, but through that buffer layer, which is what you and I do frequently. If the client can simply say, listen, uh, you know, Wealthspire is taking care of that for me. If you want to get in touch with them, please speak to the investment advisor, and that's the path. Trying to get too personal with family or close friends just after the sale, it tends to result in loss of capital or worse, arguably worse, frayed relationships with that network, and that's absolutely what we want to prevent.
Yeah, that's a little bit of good cop, bad cop, right? We're happy to be the bad cop, from the perspective of let us know, get us involved. We can help evaluate the investment. We can help communicate the advantages, the risks, the opportunities the to our client, and together we figure out if it's a good investment that fits into their overall long-term strategy. And oftentimes, we see folks go the other direction and they have another regret. Wow, I really wish I hadn't have been so quick, or I wish I would have done more due diligence on that particular investment. Because you're right, not only do you lose money, you lose friends and family members, and important relationships. Money can really create a lot of trouble, even with all the great things it can do.
Yeah, if you still have problems, but they are different problems.
Right, right. Yeah. What do they say? Money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly be a down payment for it if there is good planning and strategy around it.
And that goes
So,
back to having an advisor that is experienced in this area.
yeah,
If you've got a financial advisor that has done one or two of these in their career, they're not going to deliver to you as the client a structured process, or defining the amount that you're comfortable investing into those ventures. It's not that you can't or shouldn't invest in those ventures, but you should have a buffer layer and you should have a defined amount or limit as to what you're willing to place into those ventures.
yeah, yeah. Well said. And you're talking about one role that is important in the exercise, in this context, and that is the investment advisor. Earlier, you talked about the desire for a mentor, somebody that has been through it, not so much on the technical side, but just generally there to be a sounding board. Let's talk about this concept of building an advisory team, as early as you can. And we've touched on two: investment advisor, wealth manager, the mentor. What are some of the other key players that you see are important to have at the table?
Well, what's interesting is that your balance sheet changes. Your definition of what can be taken care of by a professional advisor, protecting what you now define as your balance sheet. And as you and I both know, working within this structure, your balance sheet includes your personal investment assets, and that's what most advisors are good at. Those assets need to be structured appropriately, and in many cases intergenerationally. But your balance sheet also includes your kids. Your balance sheet also includes your health. And so the advisory program that any client should get involved in if they have the means, how are you taking care of your health, and is your advisor helping you do that? Not directly, not not they don't. If your advisor gets out a stethoscope, that's a problem. But if your advisor can help you get plugged into a medical framework or system, uh, that's an advantage, and that's something that's necessary for you, your spouse, and your kids. The other areas relate to your family relationships. So we touched briefly on just, are the kids okay? Well, training kids is a very it's a very delicate process, and it has to be very structured. So, look, I brought up two: health, kids, but all that to say there are five or six other elements when you start to think about what the balance sheet really needs to encompass to ensure your financial advisor is aware of everything that's going on. And if the advisor is trying to do it all themselves, that is a problem. That is a red flag. that advisor has a specific area of expertise that you need him or her to do. And you need to make sure that that advisor has a track record of working with other experts in those areas to give you access, almost like a general practitioner or a general contractor.
Yep.
There is some humility in being a financial advisor and admitting you can't do everything, but that is probably your best advisor.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So thinking about those other elements that you and I work with, leading up to a transaction, obviously, perhaps it's an investment banker, could be a CPA or a tax attorney, could be a corporate attorney. We're not necessarily involved with the negotiations of the deal, but oftentimes we help orchestrate bringing those groups, those individuals together to make sure that we're all on the same page, to educate the client on the broader perspectives, and then ultimately moving through into post deal opportunities for planning. Estate attorneys come into play, and so we're working with different folks along the continuum of the life cycle. But I do really I love the way you started. You talked about health and relationships, and those oftentimes are the afterthought. And so there's a lot that a good investment advisor, wealth manager can bring to the table on those fronts. So based on what we've talked today, kind of putting a wrapper on our conversation, two open-ended questions. One, what are the takeaways that big picture we want to make sure our audience leaves? And then if there's one of those that you really want to shine the light on, let's wrap up with those two thoughts.
Sure. I guess if I was to wrap up on the process of a business sale, I would just remind everyone that there are technical elements and there are humanistic elements to sale, and to ignore either is an issue. There are very specific advisors that you can and should have on both sides, and there are other business sellers out there who have gone before you who are offering you this guidance, through this survey and through others as well. If you're feeling isolated through that sale process, and that is a frequent response, they're feeling isolated, maybe a little bit alone, that's a problem. That's a problem that you need to rectify and ensure you've taken care of. And it's not just about your technical advisors, it's about your personal financial advisors and making sure they understand as well. That's not a plug. Of course, we're biased. We think that's an important element, but there's a 2 to 3 year process, according to this survey, that people should be considering as they think about what to do with their businesses. If there was one final point I would make, it's that don't ignore that your relationships will change as you gain liquidity. That includes with your family, with yourself, with your advisors. Don't be immune or don't forget that those things are going to change, and be prepared for it. It's not something to be concerned about. It's something to be managed. And there is a process to do that. And the best financial advisors will have a program to make sure you can go through that process and feel prepared all the way along.
Well, those are great words to leave with, and it's been a real pleasure to visit with you. I appreciate you sharing your personal and professional experiences, but the survey really, I think, was a nice resource and reference point for us to talk about today. Any words as we wrap up that you want to finish with?
I think we covered it all. I think we'll have the survey available. It is a little bit dated, but the results are evergreen in our opinion, and feel free to get in touch if you have more questions about it.
Great. Well, thanks again, Matt. Have a great day, and look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Business Owner Bootcamp, presented by Wealthspire Advisors. If you have any feedback or questions, including suggestions for future topics and guests, reach out to your hosts or send us an email at clientrelations@wealthspire.com.